Psalm 23, a psalm of David. You are my shepherd, I shall not want. You cradle me in green pastures. You lead me beside still waters. You restore my soul. You guide me in the paths of righteousness, for you are righteous. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. You spread a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You soothe my head with oil. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in your house forever.
As Chase John Thompson kindles the chalice in memory of his grandfather Warren, I invite you to rise in body and/or in spirit to share the words printed in your order of service. We light this chalice in loving memory of our beloved friend and spiritual companion, Warren Thompson, and in tribute to the love a single life can inspire. May the chalice remind us of the extravagant gift of life. May it signify the community we create in our being together and our sharing together. Please be seated.
A reading from Robert T. Weston. The German poet Rilke wrote, "Be patient with all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves." We experience the sweetness of joy only because we have also tasted the bitter tears of sorrow. Life is a great mystery from beginning to end of our earthly existence. Where were we before we were born, before we were a twinkle in our parents' eyes? And where do we go when our body dies? At times like this, our various faiths give us comfort, as we all can agree that at the very least, we live on in the hearts and minds of those whom we have touched and loved. Please rise in body or spirit to sing hymn number 16.
Our friend Warren Thompson was born on June 15, 1930 in Joliet, Illinois, to parents David Edwin and Edna Mae Thompson. He was an only child who lost his father at an early age. His mother found employment as a church secretary to support herself and Warren. Warren attended grade school, then high school and junior college in Joliet. He graduated in 1951 from the University of Wisconsin with an undergraduate degree in chemistry. He then enrolled in Harvard and graduated with both a master's degree and later a PhD in physical chemistry. From 1955 to 57, he was a Fulbright scholar at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. And upon of the National Capital Area and former chair of its advisory council. Today is UN Day, and we chose to have his service of celebration on this day to mark his deep connection and commitment to the United Nations. Over the last few years of his life, Warren struggled with health issues. On July 20th, 2015, Warren died in the arms of loved ones at home. He was 85. And so, my friends, we have gathered to remember Warren and to celebrate his life.
Warren joined the National Science Foundation in 1965, and I understand that was a few weeks before Rich Reese, who's here today, joined NSF. But Warren was always very precise in remembering that he did have seniority over Rich, and the precision of Warren's mind, I think, was never a question at the National Science Foundation. That era in which Gordon Hebert joined, I think, in 1967, and who's also here, and Jay Davenport, who spent the most of his career with the National Academy of Science, was also part of that golden era when Arthur Rowe was the director, the distinguished scientist, professor, and research scientist. That golden era in which scholarship and creativity was encouraged. And so when I joined the National Science Foundation in 1974, it had become a much more government rather than academic organization. And so we were subject to all of the trials of a bureaucratic organization. The Office of International Programs at the National Science Foundation was restructured into a division, the Division of International Programs, but the natural acronym DIP was considered somewhat trivial, and so INT was chosen instead to designate this particular component of the National Science Foundation. Warren's work with the key institutions involved in the global scientific programs of his day, UNESCO with the United Nations, the National Academy of Sciences, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development based in Paris, the discipline-related scientific societies, and the State Department were all involved in these efforts to manage massive arrays of talent and scientific instrumentation to make new discoveries impossible for any single agency or indeed any single country. Some of you will remember Mildred Basilovac, the perhaps administrative heart of INT, whose ethical standards were equal to those of Warren. She and Warren became friends, and that friendship has extended across all of the Thompson family. Millie remembers that in a reorganization of INT in 1987, Warren became the senior program manager in the cooperative science section of INT with responsibility for NSF collaboration with countries in the Northern European cluster, where he and Rich Reese began their postdoctoral studies, Warren in Leiden in the Netherlands and Rich in Germany. Millie also remembers Warren bringing her an orchid and arranging for Arthur Rowe to call on her retirement day at NSF. It's been a privilege for me as I've contacted Warren's NSF colleagues to tell them of this memorial service and to learn from them of his many contributions to NSF and the high esteem in which he's held by all of them, and to remember him as a personal friend, a dedicated scientist, and as one colleague described him to me in her words, always the perfect gentleman.
It really was a privilege to get to know Warren Thompson. I'm one of many at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, also known as NIST, who knew him. I'm Eric Shirley, but I'm speaking on behalf of many. It's fair to say it's rare to find so many good graces, and yet such technical skill and capability and talent combined in a single individual, but Warren featured that. Those of us who knew him remember him very fondly, whether we interacted with him in scientific research or administratively, as was the case for me at the time that I knew him at NIST. As a professional scientist, he was a chemist and a molecular spectroscopist. And when he went to NSF in the year around 1988, he met NIST's own Alphonse Weber, who encouraged him to collaborate with his like-minded colleague at NIST, Marilyn Jaycox. And they worked in a field called matrix isolation spectroscopy, where you study very unstable molecular species, and so it demands tremendous laboratory capabilities in conducting complex experiments. He did that all very capably, and we've had many commend his scientific capabilities. He did a lot of very hard work, and he did it well. His 25 years as a guest researcher at NIST led to no fewer than 52 publications. And to give a sense of their impact, no fewer than 20 of them have been cited in the scientific literature over 20 times. This means that in a way, in his second scientific career, that is, which he picked up on the side while at the NSF, he was as productive as many scientists are in an entire scientific lifetime. Now, we heard earlier about the travails and the anguishes of working in a large bureaucratic organization. NIST is one such also. And Warren always cheerfully addressed tasks that needed doing, whether IT security, property inventory, chemical inventory, safety practices, and equipment maintenance. He always made that easy. In fact, after 25 years of work, when it came time and the project ended to decommission the lab, to disperse the equipment and chemicals and all that, it was extremely well arranged and easy for us. This is because of Warren always being so careful and helpful a person. He just did things that way. One individual at NIST who often received the brunt of staff's wrath was our safety representative, because she was seen as an obtrusion to productive scientific work. Now, Warren, though, liked to obey rules. He was very careful about that, very respectfully, and I mean this in every good way. But also, we have to say about him, he did not put up with nonsense, all right? So, this led to long discussions with our safety representative about why things were being done a certain way, and this is what she had to say about him. Her exact words are, "He was an old-school gentleman, the kind where chivalry was alive. More importantly, he was a gentle man. He was kindness. He was respectful of others. Even in our discussions about safety, he was a pleasure to work with. I will remember my time with Warren. He is missed." At another time, he was all excited telling me about the visit from his grandson, who also was aspiring to be an astronomer. And Warren said, "The only problem is the stargazing gets good at night well after my grandson's bedtime. He'll have to wait a few years for that." Well, one time that day will come. But this much we know for sure, that grandson shared his grandfather's love, and abundantly so. And for myself, let me say this. As I came to know Warren, I could not but help admire his humble and gentle spirit, his personal peace, and his great kindness. It is my great hope that I can age as gracefully as he did, and that I can aspire to be as kind and fine an individual as he was in my old age, should I live equally long as Warren. It was truly a privilege and a pleasure to get to know Warren Thompson. It is an honor to have known him, and I am happy to share with you our fond memories of a fine man.
Good afternoon. It is as the current president of the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area, as well as a fellow of Cedar Laner, that I pay tribute today to Dr. Warren Thompson's longstanding engagement in international scientific cooperation and his work with the United Nations. As Abi has mentioned, it couldn't be more fitting because today is the 70th birthday of the United Nations. The Charter was signed on June 26, 1945 in San Francisco, but it came into force on October 24th when it was ratified by some 50 states. There are now 193 member states. Warren Thompson was a long-standing member and supporter of UNA-NCA, the largest chapter of UNA-USA, which is now part of the United Nations Foundation. Our mission is to increase public understanding of the work and values of the United Nations, to encourage constructive U.S. leadership at the UN, and to prepare the next generation of global citizens. Warren's quiet, calming, and always gracious presence belied an extraordinary scientific mind and a passionate advocacy for global cooperation on scientific issues. He worked with several international scientific organizations, as you've already heard, including the UN Committee on Science and Technology, and was detailed to the State Department's International Organizations Bureau, which oversees U.S. relationships with the United Nations. His mobilization of UU congregations in this region in support of the United Nations Adopt a Minefield program exemplifies his passion in action. In the 1990s, there were 20,000 to 25,000 casualties each year from abandoned landmines, many of them children. After the landmine treaty, UNA chapters raised funds to identify affected areas, educate communities, assist survivors, and clear the landmines in Afghanistan and other conflict areas. The program saved thousands of lives. Warren raised the funds that cleared the minefield in Herat, Afghanistan. Warren also served ably as the chair of the UNA-NCA's Advisory Council of eminent international experts. Warren exemplified the values of the United Nations. This is not so surprising given how similar the values of the UN Charter and Universal Declaration of Human Rights are to the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. For example, the preamble to the Charter of the United Nations, quote, reaffirms our faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in the equal rights of men and women. It stresses the goal of international peace and justice. The first UU principle recognizes, quote, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Does that sound familiar? And the 6th principle states, quote, the goal of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, end quote. Warren lived these aspirational goals to the fullest in his work for the United Nations. He was a global citizen who thought globally and acted locally. Those of us who continue in his footsteps at UNA-NCA will do well to continue his practice of quiet, effective diplomacy in the pursuit of international scientific cooperation as we address the challenges of the 21st century, not the least of which is climate change. So thank you and especially thank you to my UNA-NCA colleagues for coming today.
By the time I began coming to Cedar Lane Church, Warren and Ellen had already been here for 8 years. They had a real jump on me in terms of getting involved in church activities. But our paths began crossing soon thereafter. And my first work with Warren was ushering on Sundays, right back here in the back of the sanctuary. He was the very best, ever gracious and welcoming. Plus, he seemed to know everyone who came in the doors. and it was a role model that I would strive to meet. Later, I knew Warren as a member of the audio team, getting here very early on Sunday mornings to set up the equipment, coordinate with the ministers, and cross his fingers that everything would work correctly. He would spend most of the service perched up on a stool by the soundboard, trying to keep all the sound system working together. But every once in a while, he would come downstairs to check the sound on the floor and where people were sitting. And he would often ask me, is the sound okay? What he didn't know was that I was losing my hearing, and I wasn't exactly the best judge for him to ask. The soundboard and equipment back in those days was very temperamental. When things might not go quite as expected, there were pops, hisses, sudden silence, all of a sudden loud noises. He was always apologetic when almost every time it was the fault of the equipment, not Warren. Warren was always the willing volunteer. He was called on many times to operate the sound system for other occasions, just like memorial services. And that was one of the burdens of his living too close to the church. I will always remember his willingness to help me with the audio and video for the annual youth group Super Bowl parties that took place right in this room. He would get the screen ready, the rabbit ear antenna set just right, and turn on the sound. While I always insisted that he hang around for the party, eat some pigs in a blanket with us, he would go home about the time that we would get the sound system so jacked up that it was at ear bleed level for the 50 or 60 kids who were here to watch the ball game. He was ever gracious about this task too. He would come back to the church later to make sure all the switches were turned off and that the equipment was retired safely for the evening. And when I asked him if he had watched the game, that's when I learned for the first time that this wasn't really a big thing in his life. Nonetheless, he was always helpful because he was asked to help. One of Warren's many contributions here at Cedar Lane was starting the Heifer activity, the Heifer Project, which provided alternative giving during the Christmas season. I must say that it was quite successful because he convinced me that I should start giving heifer gifts to my family. And in fact, I gave so many that some of them thought they owned herds somewhere around the globe. Warren was active all around Cedar Lane, but he worked quietly, mostly behind the scenes. One never heard discouraging words from Warren about all the goings-on at the church, and our church is no different than others. Why, every once in a while you can get discouraged. But as I told someone this week, if Warren had something negative to say about the church, he must have saved it to share it with Ellen when she got home, because around here he was nothing but the most gracious member. He was a dear and gentle soul, deeply devoted to Cedar Lane. Just a couple of years ago, Cedar Lane honored Warren and Ellen with the church's coveted Unsung Hero Awards that recognizes the long-time service and devotion to the church. They were very deserving of the award, and it's the only time that I know of where a couple had been honored together. After all the plaques were presented and accolades were read, as they were leaving the stage, one could see a few tears rolling down Ellen's cheeks. I can add that more than a few of us shed our own supportive tears in appreciation for Warren's and Ellen's years of service to Cedar Lane and their work among all of us. Thank you.
from George Santayana. To see things under the form of eternity is to see them in their historic and moral truth, not as they seemed when they passed, but as they remain when they're over. When a man's life is over, it remains true that he has lived. It remains true that he has been one sort of man and not another. In the infinite mosaic of history, that bit has its unfading color and its perpetual function and effect. A man who understands himself under the form of eternity knows the quality that eternally belongs to him, and knows that he cannot wholly die, even if he would. For when the movement of his life is over, the truth of his life remains. When the movement of his life is over, the truth of his life remains. We have heard the many truths of Warren's life that not only remain, but endure. There's the truth of family. Warren was a loving husband, a caring father, and a doting grandfather. He loved Ellen. As some people have said, they were an item together. And Ellen loved him back deeply and completely. She was his one true love, his wife, his friend for 53 years. We miss her today, as she is recovering from pneumonia in the hospital. And we hold her in our prayers, sending her thoughts of healing and wishes for a speedy and full recovery. One of Warren's fondest memories was traveling with Ellen to the Netherlands and introducing her to his Dutch host parents when he was a student there. Now, his daughter Barbara remembers many experiences with her father. His playing croquet with her and Doug, or badminton with all of her Ohio cousins. His trying to make a learning experience out of playing with a molecule set, instead of letting them color and do art. His placing coins by their breakfast plates to let them know that he was thinking of them. Telling Doug and Barbara the story of how Silent Night came to be written when they were little on Christmas Eve. And seeing the deep anguish, Barbara seeing the deep anguish on his face when she was hospitalized a few times as a child and adult for surgeries. Barbara also shared that Warren was convinced that if she would only join the UU Church in Pittsburgh, she would find a husband. And I want to say to you, Barbara, there's still time. Warren also took great pride in his grandson Chase, not only for who he was, but for how he felt he would carry on the family legacy, especially his love for astronomy. And then there's the truth of Warren's love for dogs, which I honor with this stole today. Warren loved the family dog Rocky, who lived to be 17. And when Rocky got older and could no longer climb stairs, Warren would carry him up the stairs at night and down back in the morning so Rocky could sleep with them in their bed. And on the night that Rocky died, Warren and Ellen were by his side, comforting him. Warren dug the grave in the backyard himself and buried their beloved dog. And there's the truth of his kindness, his gentle nature, compassion, and generosity towards animals and people in need. Warren's longtime neighbor, Shira Modell, whose house is located down the hill from Warren and Ellen's, closer to the entrance to the Beach Drive walking path, would see Warren and Rocky go for their daily walk. She wrote to me, This is what she said. As Rocky got older, the walk up the hill became more difficult for him, and he slowed down significantly. Warren would walk as slowly as Rocky needed, and then a few minutes later I would see him coming back down the hill for his own walk, since he figured that he hadn't really gotten enough exercise at Rocky's pace. I always thought, she continued, it said a lot about Warren's kindness. He would not deprive Rocky of the walk that he loved, even though it ended up taking him more than twice the time. Barbara shared how Warren, on one occasion, gave his coat to a homeless man that he regularly assisted, and how he liked to keep dollar bills in the car so he could give to people who were panhandling at stoplights. Throughout his life, any program for human rights and humanitarian need got Warren's support of time, energy, and money. There's the truth of his religious convictions. Again, Barbara recalls that Warren was raised Universalist, and it was that Universalist spirit that I feel shone through all his life. She continues, I think he would have said he believed in God, but it was never discussed as a true Unitarian Universalist. Only that he emphasized that my brother and I had to reach our own conclusions. And of course, there is the truth of his deep love for his church, Cedar Lane. For more than 4 decades, Warren was actively involved in many areas of church life, as we heard, including being the usher captain here, taking care of building security, being part of the sound booth staff, involved in the Alliance, and engaged in social justice projects such as organizing area UU churches to raise funds for the clearing of a minefield in Herat, Afghanistan. This was, as Don mentioned, through the United Nations Adopt a Minefield program. Now, Warren did all of this quietly, diligently, consistently, without seeking any recognition or praise. He was, as John said, a true unsung hero who went above and beyond his call of duty as a member because he deeply loved this church, his faith, and his people. There's the truth of his unwavering commitment and support of the United Nations. As we heard, he was a member of the United Nations Association here in the DC region, and he truly believed in the UN's mission to preserve peace and build a better world for all people and its continued relevance in today's world. So he was thrilled when we instituted a couple of years ago an annual Sunday service that was focused on the United Nations, and delighted in letting me know that the logo that you see here, which is the Unitarian Universalist United Nations office symbol, was actually created by a fellow Cedar Lane member. There is his love of astronomy. He would set up his telescope for neighbors, the local school, and family members to view astronomical events. He considered himself very fortunate to have been able to see 3 total solar eclipses in his lifetime, including the big one in Baja, Mexico, which he shared with his daughter Barbara in 1991. On July 20th, 1969, Warren watched Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon from the waiting room of the hospital where Barbara had been admitted for surgery. Now, Warren died on the 46th anniversary of the moon landing on July 20th, 2015, which I don't think is a coincidence. Now, there are many other truths as well that we heard this afternoon. There is the truth of his career as a scientist and researcher. We heard about his scientific capabilities and significant contributions in his field, chemistry, his ability to work effectively and graciously amidst bureaucratic complexities and office politics, how he obeyed rules but would not put up with nonsense, how he had an extraordinary and keen mind and a caring heart. Other truths of his being: an old school gentleman, a gentle man, a humble and gracious spirit, a quiet and calming presence, being someone who was humble, who had a quick wit, who was tenacious, who had a firm belief in following through all of his commitments, even if it meant time away from his family, being hard on himself, but ready to cut others a break, and being guided in life by what he believed was right. Now, in all these ways, we remember Warren Thompson. We give thanks for his life and his legacy, for his compassion, for his convictions, for his humility, for his humanity, for his career, for his service to the community and to this church. And so, in the days that are to come, let us remember him. Let us remember him in solidarity and service to the marginalized. Let us remember him in rites of passage and anniversaries. Let us remember him in solitary moments of bereavement. Let us remember him too with joy for the good times and the many good memories we shared with him, and for all that he gave to life. So let us remember Warren Thompson through the reflections of our hearts, the strivings of our minds, and the work of our hands. So may it be.
I wanted to thank all of you for the support that you've given my mother and my family through our several months of illness with my dad, and also being here today to show support for him. And I also wanted to let you know a little secret, that you've heard all these wonderful things about him, but he actually felt his life was a failure, that he had not he hadn't done the big experiment, he hadn't solved world peace, he hadn't done all of these things, that he was just a little drip in the bucket of humanity. But I was reflecting on the fact that any drip of a liquid into another liquid causes ripples, and all of the ripples from his little drops have affected all of you and other people in Herat and other places that he had no idea. Appreciate what you can do, even if it's a little thing for others, and it does affect other people. Accept it and appreciate it in life, and don't have to die thinking that you didn't succeed in affecting other people. You have. You don't have to have a memorial service to celebrate what you do to help others. But thank you for coming today and for supporting our family.
Thank you, Barbara. Please join me in this spirit of prayer and meditation. Spirit of life, who some call God and others do not name at all, fall afresh on us this afternoon as we celebrate the life and mourn the loss of Warren Thompson. We meet here in the presence of death to do homage to the Spirit of life. We would make this time love's time, and these simple rites love's confessional, for it is love's tribute that we offer here today. Our voices may be the voices of sadness, but the language we speak is the language of love. We who come in the name of love, to express a calm and abiding trust in love's consecrating power. We lift up to the eternal Warren's wife of so many years, Ellen, and send our healing prayers to her in her hospital bed. We know she is with us in spirit, and we pray earnestly for her recovery. We ask your blessing on Warren and Ellen's children, Barbara and Douglas, and on their grandson, Chase, who is Douglas's son. May this gathering provide some manner of comfort for them, and may we keep them in our thoughts and our prayers. And to Warren, we will never forget you and the positive impact you have had on so many of us. May the spirit of love abide with you in death as it did in life. And may we carry your love with us in this world that is at once beautiful and broken, joyful and sad, timeless and time-bound. Amen. Please rise in body or spirit as we lift our voices and sing hymn number 159.
A Please be seated. Our closing words are from William Henry Channing, more as a response to Warren's sense that he had somehow not contributed anything of significance to this life. To laugh often and love much, to win and hold the respect of intelligent persons and the affection of little children, to earn the approbation of honest critics, and to endure without flinching the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty always, whether in earth's creations of human handiwork, to have sought for and found the best in others, and to have given it oneself, to leave the world a wee better than one found it, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, a cheery letter, or a redeemed social condition, to have played with enthusiasm, laughed with exuberance, and sung with exultation, to go down to dust and dreams, knowing that the world is a little better, and that even a single life breathes easier because we have lived well. This is to have succeeded. And in that sense, our dear friend Warren had succeeded. Go in peace, my friends. Go making peace, living gently, loving mightily, and bowing to the mystery. Please remain seated for the postlude.